I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to share this story with you. I have such a crush on this artist, and I hope by the end of this talk you do too. But we have a lot to get to, and so I just want to start by explaining that this is not the story of a bamboozler. She was not a con artist. She was a 19th century sculptress. Sculptor, I'm going to use that term, sorry. And she was bamboozled, actually, multiple times. So I'm just getting that out of the way. We're centering the story of the person that was done the bad deal. And I just kind of want to spend this time giving her a little bit more agency in her story than just a victim. I think her legacy is done as much of a bad deal as she was, because a lot of times we just hear the tragic parts of her story instead of the parts where she made choices to do cool things. So we are gonna basically right that wrong by rewriting the wrongs and giving our own narrative to her. Does that sound okay with everybody? All right. I knew you were the good audience for this. So please gird your loins and also girdle your loins, because we're going back to the 19th century. And we're ending up in Paris during the Belle Epoque. Camille Claudel was 17 years old when she got to Paris in this electric time when all the creatives who wanted to be in this creative center were showing up. We're talking about Renoir, Degas, Toulouse-Lautrec, Victor Hugo, Proust, Debussy. It was just like all the people in one place. And then you have this 17-year-old, talented, single, beautiful, spicy lady who's like crashing this party and wants to add her name to this hallowed list. And I want to know what that was like. I'm so curious because this is just one little vignette. Somebody at some point asked her what her favorite virtue is. So if you need a pickup line, maybe that. And her answer was, I don't have one. I think they're all boring. I want to ask her on a date. That sounds amazing. And again, we don't get those stories. There's just a dominant narrative that's everywhere. It's so everywhere that even her museum, her own museum, tells the same kind of story that I think is boring. It's not my favorite. So we are going to get to the part that's out there, the bamboozling part, but we are also going to get to the retelling, the righting of wrongs. And before we get to that fun part, we have to kind of just cover the part that's already told. So I'm just going to borrow the words from the museum. I think that's a pretty straightforward way to use it. So here you go. What they say out in the zeitgeist is Rodin was seduced by the fiery temperament and exceptional talent of his new student, Camille Claudel. In 1884, she was admitted to his studio as an assistant and rapidly became his collaborator, mistress, model, and muse. They worked together in harmony, sharing studios and models, and her own work betrays the influence of her master. The intense, tormented relationship would have an everlasting effect on both artists. Could be. I think that is a really lovely comment. It does feel a little bit like witchcraft, that this spicy character has kind of been just put in the passive tense. Did you guys notice that? And she also is kind of outclassed by her boyfriend. If you don't know this tale, the guy, Rodin, is the Rodin, Auguste Rodin. He's famous for all kinds of things: The Kiss, The Thinker, The Gates of Hell, and he's such a boss that he gets main billing in her biography. That's one of the wrongs we are righting. And I do realize that this torrid, tragic, tormented twosome has too many teas not to spill. We will. But we also have some other business to attend to, which is Camille's business. So, like I was saying, all the action verbs in this bio are written in the passive tense. She was admitted, she became, she was influenced. And I don't love that for her. Nobody wants to be baby put in the corner. The only active part that she's given credit for is the seducing, and I don't like that either. Nobody wants to be going down in history for their choice of lovers. Right, gents? Right, ladies? That's not what we want. And I also just generally want to say this kind of treatment to women and femmes is just hella reductive. And we don't come to Odd Salon for reductive stories. So we're going to break this one down piece by piece, starting from the beginning. The assistant is the first one we're going to tackle, and the facts here are correct. It was 1883, she's 19. She gets invited by Rodin to be part of his crack team when he's putting together his studio. He's just got a couple of giant commissions, The Gates of Hell, 178 characters in this design, and then the Burghers of Calais, which was burdened by cliches because the people who hired him were like all up in his business, so he definitely needed some help. And he's got this giant pool of talented artists in the Belle Epoque, but he decides to bring one of his students, who's really good, onto his team. That's all good. I'm fine with that. The part that I find really challenging is that the order of the story is that he was seduced and then she was invited. And so I just want to try to address that. And the best way I can do to think of it is to make this situation relatable. So we're going to do a little activity. It's going to be easy. Pretty sure it will be fun, so just go with me here. Let's just imagine that you find yourself in a bar, a crowded bar with some friends, some strangers, I don't know, maybe a history club, a lecture series, a place that makes you laugh, some cool folks. That's the requirement. And in that space, I want to present to you an idea that actually comes up for me all the time. Hopefully it does for you too. You're like, in this room, you're mixing, you're mingling, and you zero in on somebody who's really interesting, really intriguing, really magnetic. It's a friend crush. It's like a crush, but you don't have to like the person. Do you know what I mean? And it's so instinctual, you just like catch a vibe and you want to spend more time with them. And you hope you feel the same way. And sometimes it's unrequited, and sometimes you can't say the words, and sometimes it's not something you can define, but it's the same feeling. You just don't have to worry about if they're available, what their sexuality is, if you're attracted. It's just a feeling. No agenda at all. You guys are with me with this, right? It's a thing. Okay. So we're back in that bar. I'm just going to choose Odd Salon because, you know, there are a lot of people in this room who are crush-worthy, but you get to set your scene. The only requirement is it has to have at least one interesting person, because the ask is for you to think back to the moment when you noticed your latest or your greatest friend crush. I'm going to give you a minute, but hopefully this is easy. Are we good? The reason I want to put you in these shoes is because I just want you to feel that feeling of being drawn to somebody for no reason other than wanting to be around them. And then we're going to come back to Camille, because I don't think there had to be an agenda. I don't think there had to be a bamboozling for her to be invited into Rodin's studio. I think she could just be really good, really talented, really interesting in a friend crush way to him. But mostly she just earned the job. That's what I prefer the story to be. Are you guys okay with that too? Instead of calling her an assistant, let's just call her an artist. That's what it is. So that's one out of the way. Collaborator, that's the next one. This is a little bit, one that I'm a little bit more mixed about, because even though she got invited to this like crack team of sculptors, it's still a reductive job because she's an assistant. And what that means is Rodin brings his grand vision and his expertise and his rich patrons, and he has a lot of assistants do the other stuff. And Claudel is really good at details, and so she often gets assigned to that. And we know that she's really good at details because if you look at her work, you can see this like incredible, it's been described as lyricism, like the reality of the way that bodies work and move and bend. She's really good at things like hands and feet, and all artists of all mediums can tell you that's really hard to do. A famous sculptor like Rodin can tell you that's really hard to do, because here are some of his feats of feet. Do you see how they look kind of like, I don't know, Barney Rubble's feet? Witchcraft? Who knows? Here's the witchcraft, though. These are Camille Claudel's, where they just feels so natural. And there's not one pose. There are many ways that feet can move, and she had them all. So here's the third one. These are Rodin's feet, according to what's written on the plinth. But this is when she was working as his assistant. And so, I mean, if you, let's say, were working on a piece of art with someone and you did some parts and they did some parts, would you call that, I don't know, a collaboration? Do you think both people should have co-billing? Do you think that's what happened in Rodin's studio? No. It never happened. He never shared credit, and no matter how much others influenced or assisted in his work. So, for example, those are figures from The Gates of Hell. So if you ever see The Kiss or The Thinker, you can give a little salute to Our Lady, because she was definitely involved. Yeah, so many salutes are coming. We're not done. We do have to get into the goss, and here's the part where I tell you all the rumors are true. They definitely did have that friend crush turn into a crush crush. They did have that relationship turn into that kind of relationship. Rodin's reputation continued to be on the rise. His professional standing wasn't hurt. He wasn't marred by this scandal in any significant way. He went down in history for his art, as we know, because we know his art. Claudel, her relationship turned into that kind of relationship. Yes. She definitely was bamboozled witchcraft into this position of being the scandalous one, because she was the, I don't know, the temptress. She was the one who was a woman when women weren't supposed to know what sex was until they were married. She was the one who, when her family found out about this, they wrote her out of the family fortune. She was the one who, her artistic reputation was just forever yoked to Rodin's. It was definitely something like a turning point in her life. So we're not going to rewrite this one. We're just going to own it. That is part of Camille's story. But this one is fun. I promise this one is fun. So Rodin, Camille, they start to do a thing, and suddenly Rodin's work gets really sexy. He was really into kind of mimicking the classic forms, and then suddenly he's doing the kiss, he's doing eternal springtime, he's got these figures that are expressing desire, and that timing isn't questionable. We know that happened. But the thing is, Camille was there to art. She was a professional artist. There were a lot of professional models. This is a sculpting studio. They're doing human bodies. You've got human bodies all over the place. And so he wasn't short on them. And there's like not any surprise that she was an inspiring figure, whether or not she was a nude in the studio. So her traces are all over the place. And the other thing you kind of have to consider is that in that time, women could do art, but they had to be pretty while they were doing it. One of Camille's contemporaries in Paris, her name was Rose Bonheur, and she was also an artist, and she had to go and get permission from the police in order to be able to wear pants when she was painting in her studio. So Camille didn't get to do that. She was in dresses, she was looking pretty, she was carving marble, she was manhandling clay, and she was in the studio with this man who was really into her. So this is cool. I'm good with this. I think it's kind of cute, actually. But the thing that I really like about this story is that Camille would have been short on bodies. It was considered indecent and outrageous for women to be in the same room as nude men. They were just going to get corrupted. So Camille wouldn't have had access to the same bodies that all of her contemporaries would have, except for there were plenty of bodies around Rodin's studio, and so she took advantage of that. And she really took advantage of it because she made sexy pieces. In a time when scandalous couples were not something that were supposed to be part of women's oath. And so that choice to express desire in sculptors when the world was not ready for it is amazing to me. I love this look on her. I'm gonna call her a renegade. She opened doors for future artists and basically just told all of Paris, hey, we like it too. Calm down. So we're feeling good about models, right? How about muses? I know, this one's kind of complicated. I have complicated feelings about it because I think it's really beautiful when art is inspired. And if you are engaged in anything, really, it's going to inform your art if you are a good artist. And once Claudel came on the scene, the art that Rodin made was changing based on his inspiration, but also based on the influences he had in the room. And Claudel's was changing too. She was his teacher. She was learning things every day, and you can see that story in the art that she's making. But the troublesome part is that this dynamic continued. So as Claudel got practice, she started to develop her own style, her own perspective, her own way of expressing emotion in her sculptures, and she got really good at it. Like, this one is a story about two lovers, but if you look at their faces, they're not on the same page about what that relationship looks like. They're conflicted, the emotions are conflicting. Rodin was never able to do anything like that, but Claudel was able to kind of take what she learned from him and then make it her own. And that kind of influence, I think, is something that we miss because for the most part, Rodin was the big name. She was known as his pupil all along. And so when critics or collectors would come look at her art, they'd look for the signs of his invisible hand in it. She never really was able to escape that. Rodin was pretty good at his stuff. Like, we're not mad at this kind of sculpture, but you might notice the way it's kind of like her sculpture. And nobody owns poses, nobody owns stories or emotions, but I think it is really addictive to just label her pupil forever. So, I don't know, let's go with maybe, I mean, this could be collaborator, but I'm gonna say if Rodin gets to be called a genius, she should too, right? Yeah. So here we have a list. This is one I can get behind, but we still have some bamboozling to discuss. I'm gonna try to make this really quick and snappy because it's kind of heartbreaking and I wanna save us from it. So we're just gonna go a little bit further into her life story. 1882, after 9 years, she decides she's gonna leave her relationship with Rodin. The romance, the mistress thing isn't working for her, but because art circles in Paris don't really understand her, she can't get a lot of commissions, they don't like her sexy work, so she is still under his influence because she's working in his studio. She continues to be there, she continues to assist him, and that continues for another 6 years until even that relationship unravels. She decides that she doesn't want to be under his shadow anymore. She wants to prove that she's got her own worth. So she goes, she works in her own studio, and she basically, in her own words, says, "I'm in no mood to be deceived any longer by the crafty devil and false character whose greatest pleasure is to take advantage of everyone." A good reason to leave, right? But then we get to 1905, and she's struggling to support herself. Family, friends, even Rodin are sending her money to cover rent and basics, but marble and bronze are not basics for someone who doesn't have a lot of resources. But she's not ready to give up on her art. That's like bread and water, something that she lives on. So this stress continues. She can't really feel like she's living the life she wants to live. And eventually she gets to a point where she breaks down. And in 1905, she starts showing signs of mental illness. So she isolates herself. She gets really paranoid and obsessed about hiding her work and her ideas from Rodin, maybe in a way that's unhealthy, especially because at some point in this, she decides to destroy all of the art she has in her possession so that nobody will steal her ideas. And again, I have another quote from her that I think is pretty telling. She says, "There was a malevolent hand working behind the scenes to divest me of all of my friendships." This, my friends, is what we call foreshadowing, because there is more to the bamboozlement, and it only gets sadder from here. So are your loins still girded and girdled. I know that we haven't painted or, I guess, sculpted Rodin in a very kind light, but this part of the story is actually not really on his shoulders. The worst part happens after they've split. The worst part is also that it happens, she gets bamboozled by the people that she loves and are kind of most dear to her, her family. And it all kind of goes down in 1913. So her father dies. He's the only one in her family who really supported her art career. 8 days later, her brother shows up, makes her forcibly, takes her away from her home, and she gets sent to a psychiatric hospital to get institutionalized. And the intake papers say that it was voluntary, but the only people who sign those papers are the doctor and her brother. The official diagnosis, I mean, this is hard to read. It says she's suffering from a systematic persecution delirium, mostly based on false interpretations and imagination. Reductive. And she lived in that hospital until she died, 30 years. Maybe, I don't know, there are lots of question marks I have, and we don't really have these stories either because her family shut off her communication. She wasn't allowed to write letters. They only visited her 8 times in 30 years. One of her friends came and was just like, this woman should not be institutionalized. This is my friend. Bring her back into the world. Doctors and hospital staff, after just 5 years, were like, she is calm and cogent and maybe has some outbursts of emotion sometimes, but I don't know, who wouldn't in that kind of space? And I do have another quote from her. I think, here we go. I live in a world so curious, so strange, of the dream that was my life. This is my nightmare. And then she died. The end. No, I would not do it to you. I'm not going to leave you there. I'm not as cruel as her family. I mean, it is a very sad ending, and there's nothing we can do to change that. It's an incredibly bamboozling story about someone who is truly bamboozled, and I am not going to take that away. It would be reductive not to tell that story, part of the story, just like it's reductive that we didn't tell the other part of the story in a way that gives her that main character energy that she deserves. But even though it's hard, I do think it's worth telling because we are, okay, we're talking about sculptors here. That means we're also talking about the power of perspective. The essential nature of sculpture as a medium is that it tells a unique story from every angle. That's the 3D nature of it. And if you really want to understand a sculpture, you've got to walk around it. You've got to see all its sides. And if you don't take care to do this, you'll end up with a reductive understanding of its true design. The same is true of Camille Claudel's story. I've been pushing one narrative tonight. Rodin stands would probably push a very different character. There's always more angles, and I think that that's the beauty of it, is that we don't have to be reductive in the stories we tell ourselves. Looking at angles means that we're better critics, we're better storytellers, we're better humans. And so this is a really nice example of the fact that people contain multitudes, but stories and histories and legacies do too. And I am gonna choose one to hold on to tonight because it makes me feel like it encapsulates what Camille Claudel means to me. And it's like related to the things she did with her whole heart, because art reflects life, but life also reflects heart. And Camille Claudel lived with such passion. She worked so hard to chase her dreams, even when there are so many obstacles in her way, and nobody really supported her in her endeavors in a way that was gonna lift her up. She had to do all that for herself, and she did. She lived the high highs, she lived the low lows, she stretched and grew and knew herself and her style, and she wasn't afraid to take those brave leaps to do things that I just made her more expansive. And I think the beauty of those choices that she made is that she made some incredible art that expressed some incredible complexities about the world and the way she saw it. And though much of it was destroyed in that period, that sad part, there are about 90 pieces that remained. And about half of them are in the museum that displays it, that opened in 2017. And you can go and see it. You can look at all those pieces of art. You can walk around them and see them on the angles. But there is also one here in San Francisco. So I walked up to the Legion of Honor last week and took these photos. I also did the count. There are 57 Rodins. There's one Claudel. But it's worth seeing. It's her sculpture of Rodin, his bust. She started it when they were together, so there's probably a lot of complex emotions that were behind it. She finished it from memory. I think it's so expressive. And it's way better than the one he did of her, which is also there. So you can go have those feelings too. And just know there is so much more than the story that was told about her. So we're going to toast. And I'm going to toast to you. I'm going to say, for all of us, even Claudel, may we get to choose our own path. May we fill it with passions, and may we get to walk with all that main character energy that we all deserve.